If you're still having trouble clearing your Imaginarium Theatre, especially getting the 9 Stellas or Visionary mode, then you have come to the right place. Hello everyone and welcome back to another guide video, and this time around I do have a guide for you for the second season of this Imaginarium Theatre for version 5.8. Now, while I am aware that the developers have announced a new Lunar Mode for the upcoming theatre that will not apply for this particular season, that will only be coming up on the next month of October when Notcry actually drops, so I will be doing some coverage there, so feel free to stick around if you're interested in a guide video for that one. And of course, if you're not familiar with the basic info for the Imaginarium Theatre, here are some visuals that I have created, and feel free to pause to take a look and read. And of course, I do all these infographics based on Visionary Theatre. I will be updating them once the new Lunar Mode drops. And as usual, timestamps are provided in the video, so feel free to jump to whichever section that you are having trouble with. Now for this particular season, the elements are Pyro, Hydro, and Dendro. The possible reactions being between Vaporize, Burning, and lastly, Bloom. The opening casts, which are units you have to pick between the one you own or the trial units, are Hu Tao, Toma, Nilu, Xingqiu, Baizhu, and lastly Kalei. While the special casts, which are characters that will ignore the elemental restriction, however can only be brought if you actually own them and build them to the requirement, are Chaska, Sitlali, Inefa, and lastly Yan San. So for the general tips, I will be just showing a simple Google Doc here instead of making a visual. So if you want to take a look, just feel free to pause the video. If you have any questions, just leave them down in the comments below, and let's jump straight to the act tips itself. Now I have done a massive revamp on all my infographics for the act recommendations as well as the information that I will be providing in the guide. So if you don't mind, I will be taking just a few minutes of your time to roughly explain what all these visuals means. Of course, there's the act here itself. I do have my own level of standards, followed by best being the absolute recommendation that I would give, followed by good, which is the green color. And then we have things like okay or doable. Okay means they're not too difficult, but they're not completely easy. Doable means in the right situation, it can actually be rather easy to do. But if you don't meet that situation, then it's like gonna be a bit tricky. Can be tough is rather situational because I can't give any proper recommendations because it really depends on how well invested your units are. Because even if I say that this one is something that can be tough and I say it's something you can consider, if your characters are completely unbuilt, that's something I definitely do not recommend in that situation. So you will be the judge of that. For not recommended, I just simply don't recommend them. No matter how good your units are, no matter how much of a challenge you want, you simply do not benefit anything from doing any of these. And annoying is, well, a complete waste of time, which you'll be seeing them in later parts. Now for all the images, the numbers above the enemy portrait itself are the number of enemies that you actually have to deal with whenever applicable. And then we have the Stella icon here, as well as the requirements, which in this case you have to clear within a specific time. The Fantasia flowers that you get from clearing the challenge itself. And of course, the stopwatch icon implies the time limit. For Act 1, the best one is definitely going to be the Ruin Duo. You only have to deal with a single Ruin Drake and a single Ruin Grader. You have quite a lot of time there, so if you can afford to do that, you can consider throwing away a lot of your weaker units so that you can actually save all your stronger units for later acts. The same could be said for the Thunder Warrior manifestation. You do have a bit less time to clear. If you're not familiar with his mechanic, it basically starts by summoning a trial field around it that lasts for 13 seconds. You will have that amount of time to break the ward shield that it creates, and the damage that you do will be boosted as long as you remain within the field. Failing to break it will make it convert the remaining ward shield into an electro shield, and also all your energy will get sapped, so it is ideal for you to break the shield because you will gain all your energy back. Now, he's not actually that tanky, at least compared to, I would say, the best options. The amount of overall HP at this particular level is actually not that much different. The best strategy here is to simply use all your elemental bursts early and just try to do as much damage as you can before he completes the move at all. The only other ones that I can kind of recommend are probably the can be tough categories here. The Ruin robots, you spawn like 2 waves of them. There's not really that much of them and they're rather close to each other, so you don't need any sort of grouping. So if you have a team that has a good AoE damage profile, then this is something you can consider. If you want a bit of points, you can do the Elite Challenge by doing the Saurian Warriors. You only have to deal with only 6 of them. They're definitely the latest enemies, so they're tankier than I would say most average enemies, but I think by today's standard, they're about as strong as a Ruin Guard or a Ruin Grader. So if you have enough damage, it's really not that big of a deal. And of course, both the Abyss Mages prefers you to have Dendro because it's a Hydro Abyss Mage. They're annoying, don't waste your time. And then I don't recommend too much on the Hilichurl rogues. They're not difficult if you do bring Pyro and have some amount of AoE. However, you don't actually benefit that much by just taking the harder route. So for Act 2, we do have quite a few good options. I would say most of them are really good options. The best one, you can choose between the two Dendro Breacher Primers or the Rock Avatars of Lava. So for the Dendro Breacher Primers, you ideally do want to bring Hydro and try not to bring a Dendro-centric team, but with enough damage, you can probably brute force it. When you start the chamber, run all the way to the right or left, wait for the Breacher Primers to like group together, give them about, I say 8 to 10 seconds, and then once they're close to a certain point and starts forming their Dendro Shield, you can just run back, use all your abilities, remove their shield to stun them for a bit, and just kill them both at the same time. The Pyro Avatars of Lava, there's nothing special about them too. However, if you do bring Pyro here, you can build up the bar above its head, and then it will take physical damage on certain thresholds throughout its health. If you fill the bar entirely, it will just completely die, but by then, you would kill it before the bar even fills up. If you do have a Hydro-centric DPS like Morlani or Tartaglia, you can also consider getting the Fluid Avatars of Lava because they're permanently Pyro-infused. So you can basically gain like pre-vaporize here, so there's really nothing to say here. The doable option would definitely be the Geo Breacher Primers. You have to deal with like 5 small ones and 1 big one, and there's only like 2 waves to them, but they're not exactly the tankiest enemies, so that's something that you can consider. Now for not recommended, just don't do the Fatui Gang. They don't even give you, it's not even the Elite Challenge as you can see here, because the Elite Challenge is actually the Lawachos and the Rogue, and you have to kill with like 3 or 4 waves of them, so it's really annoying. We do have the Cryo Lawachol Hilichurl Rogue combo. If you do want to do this for the extra points, I recommend bringing a bow character if possible. And then when you start a challenge, go to the Anemo Hilichurl Rogue, wait for it to basically fly in the air, or maybe don't, just do some abilities to stagger them, because the Anemo Rogue will actually fly up in the air on its Anemo Slime and try to shoot you down with range, so you can actually bring him down by shooting the Anemo Slime. Once you deal with 2 of them, you'll have 2 Cryo Lawachols. Bringing a Pyro unit here means you can actually trigger free melts, remove the shield to reduce its aggression and make it take a little bit more damage, but otherwise it's actually quite straightforward. So for the first boss in Act 3, we do have the triple Kenki. Now, all the attacks are split between their respective copies, and generally the Cryo Kenki and the Anemo Kenki will have slightly high resistance towards their own element, but not enough for it to really matter because none of those elements are in this particular season. So my recommendation is that when you start the challenge, you immediately run towards the original Kenki as fast as you can, because the Cryo Kenki will always do his dash and slash attack, which will push him all the way to the end of the chamber. So what you can do here is you can time your elemental burst and you keep watch on the Anemo Kenki, and then say like Xingqiu burst, right? So you time it so that when the Anemo Kenki does its wind blade attacks as well as the Cryo Kenki doing the dash slash attack, you can basically iframe both of them. After the Cryo Kenki dashes, you want to slightly go further on the opposite side to make him run back towards the group. This will basically put them really close to each other, and then after that, my personal recommendation is just simply stay in the middle and spam all your abilities. Now, Nilo Bloom here is absolutely amazing, or any teams with a high AoE damage profile, but I'll go to the character recommendations on a later section. So for Act 4, we do have the Monolith Defense, and we have some options that I would definitely recommend over the other, notably being the Hunter Seeker as well as the Fluid Avatars of Lava. The main reason is that for the Stellar requirement, you have to keep the Monolith above 35% HP, or if not more than that. For these 2 options, there's only one of them at a time, so you can do this thing, what I like to call a pacifist run, where you simply do a bit of damage to attract its aggro or its attention to you, and then you can just waste the next 3 to 3 minutes for as long as you want, because as long as it doesn't attack the Monolith, you're basically getting a free star here. And this is also probably the best spot for you to throw all your lesser invested units or your weaker units, because if you get any of these 2 options, you don't actually need damage. You just simply have to wait for the time to run out, make sure you meet the requirement, and you get a free Stella and some nice flowers. Now, the only other okay option I would recommend here are the Fatui Gang. You only get 2 of them at the same time, they spawn clockwise, and you can also do a semi-pacifist run. Granted, you do have to take attention from 2 different enemies, and if you do have enough damage, you can definitely try to kill them because they don't really attack too fast. So yeah, actually quite a decent option here. The rest are rather annoying. Notably, these 2 here are basically just the same with a slightly different Lawachol. You get 1 Lawachol every 2 Metachols, and the problem here is that the Lawachol will always have its aggro on you. However, the Metachol itself actually will look at the Monolith first. So while the Lawachol is trying to do damage to you, the Mythochil will focus its attention on the Monolith and trying to draw its attention as a melee-centric team will risk the Lawachol actually doing collateral damage onto the Monolith. So that's why I don't even recommend it. And because I cleared this with like Nouvellette, and I think I cleared it with like what, 30 or 40%, which is barely enough for the Stellar requirement. So if you do have another option, I don't really recommend it. Now, the Elite one is also not a recommended one here for the robots. You get a Ruin Grader and I think a Ruin Guard every 7 kills or roughly around there. You get 2 robots at a time. I don't recommend this because they have range attacks and they move a lot. And they spawn really far from each other. So yes, you have 3 other options. The other 3 are really bad. So for Act 5, we do have a few recommendations, and this is basically a killing count kind of challenge. The best one is definitely the Ruin Guard and the Ruin Grader combo. You only have to kill 4 of them in order to clear, and then 5 for the Stella. However, all of them has a time limit of 2 minutes. Obviously, the best option is the easiest. You only have to kill 5 of them. They spawn literally right next to each other. So there's nothing for me to say here. If you have a good AoE here, you don't even need a good AoE team. But if you do, then life will be quite easy. The next, I guess you could say okay one that I would recommend is definitely the Ruin Sentinel gang. You have to kill 7 of them for the clear and 9 for the Stella. However, you know, they are a little bit tanky, but at least they can't actually kill you. I believe they spawn anti-clockwise. So if you have enough damage in your team, you can definitely try to get the Stella from this. And then I guess you could say the next one that I can kind of recommend, the normal one, would be the Electro Rifthounds. Now granted, we do have Inefa, so you can technically use her to try to activate their state and make them take more electro damage, but it's not necessarily good because that makes them more aggressive. And for those who are not familiar, Rifthounds will apply a status with their attacks called the Corrosion status, which will basically do a small drain on your health over time. It's not considered damage, so abilities like Serpent Spine will actually still maintain its stacks. You have to kill 8 for the clear, 14 for the Stella. If you deal with all the little rift pops, you're going to be taking quite a good bit of corrosion damage. So unless you run double hydro, or maybe if you want to run some sort of healer, there's a chance that you're probably going to end up being low health. Of course, if you don't run Furina, maybe you can survive. So I don't really know about that part. And then for not recommended, rather situational, Sumeru gang, you have to kill a lot of them. It's a waste of time. For the Tenebrous Mimesis, if you don't run Inefa Electrocharge or a Burning Team, it's going to take quite a lot of time to break. Of course, you can bring other units like Inari or Amber or Shangling for the 0 ICD application, but you have 3 other perfectly fine options, so don't waste your time with that one. And of course, the annoying options are the Fatu gang. They teleport a lot, absolute waste of time. It is the elite, I forgot to put the exclamation mark here, so yeah. So for the second boss in Act 6, we do have the Tenebrous Papilla Type 3. It will always start off the fight by creating a Void Ward shield and charging up its super move. Just like the Tenebrous Mimesis, it will become immune to damage until the ward is broken. So the ward is a hit count based shield which can only build up based on elemental hits. One elemental hit will be considered as 1 point, and 1 Night Soul aligned hit will count as 3 points. The ward has a durability of 72, and upon breaking it, you will basically stun it for the next 10 plus seconds or so, and it will continue the fight with reduced resistance. Ideally, it is best for you to try to actually break the Void Ward, because otherwise it will continue the rest of the fight with quite a decent amount of resistance. So as for what can actually apply in this case here, we do have the Night Soul aligned units, notably Chaska charge attack alone is enough to break by herself. Mawika in her bike form regardless of skill or burst, preferably a normal attack spam and maybe a bit of a cancel to get some faster hits. And of course Kinesia's normal attacks with the special skill mode. If you do have an FI, you can consider running an Electro Charge team, or you can of course run a Burning team. And then of course we do have Hyper Bloom 2 if you do have an FR, but that's just kind of a side thing. I would say my recommendation here, aside from the Natlon units, is definitely a mix between burning teams. Whether you run Alakina Burning, you pair it together with Emily. I would say units that will apply lots of elements in this particular archetype is definitely Kole with her Elemental Burst. Tinari with both his charge attack and burst is enough to almost break the shield entirely by himself. Or of course, you could use Amber's Elemental Burst because it does actually hit 20 times overall. And if you can somehow pair Yoimiya together with Yolan or Xingqiu, you might have a chance to actually break this really fast. But otherwise, that's all the options that I can definitely give. So after you break the ward, it'll be stunned for a little bit with reduced resistance and continue to fight that way. And of course, that's where you basically just continue your fight as usual. Nothing much for me to say here. Try not to let it charge the ultimate move, because upon taking a damage from the explosion, it will apply 60 attrition stack, of which each stack will drain 1% of your max HP plus 300 damage. So getting hit by the move itself will apply 60 stacks, which will drain 60% of your max HP, which in most situations is enough to basically one-shot you regardless of how much HP you have. So for Act 7, we also have a few decent options. My personal recommendation would be the Consecrated Beast, because you only have to kill 2 of them and they group up pretty easily. If you want to do a bit of grouping, just try to go for the Crocodile instead of Tiger. Now, they do have their respective moves where they do their special attacks and summon an elemental block. You break the block preferably with their own elements instantly or any elemental attacks. And once you break the block, you simply hit them again to stun them for a bit, make them lose a bit of HP and lose quite a good bit of resistance. The second best option would definitely be the Ruin Hunter Ruin Drake combo. As the image implies here, both characters will have a notable advantage, however it's not necessary. The 2 waves of Ruin Hunters try not to be mid-air whenever you fight them, because otherwise they will try to do an attack and for some reason they're coding, they don't have any like real ground attacks or something, or they don't have any real in the air attacks, so they'll bring them up to the sky and fly and they'll do the homing bombardment. If you don't bring a bow character, you're basically screwed, so please don't be mid-air. And then for the Ruin Drake Skywatch, you can shoot the little limbs on its wing to bring it down. However, I would argue this is not too necessary because you can still hit their tail just fine. For the normal option, we do have the Tail 13 Font Max. The only downside here is that there's quite a good amount of them, in total of 3 waves. However, with sufficient DPS, they should not be a problem. If you want to deal with less enemies, we also do have the Baptismal V-Shaps. You deal with 2 hatchlings and the big one. The only downside I would say here is that they get staggered very easily, and it can actually be quite annoying for circle impact teams. Now, situationally, we also have the Mimesis combo, and as usual, if you don't bring an Electrocharge team, fast hitting attacks or elemental attacks as well as burning teams, I don't recommend getting this at all. And for not recommended is because due to the elemental restriction for the Cryo Abyss Mage as well as the Cryo Herald. Now, the Cryo Abyss Mage just doesn't want to group. Cryo Herald, after you almost kill it, it enters phase 2 and summons a Cryo Shield. Slows you down a lot unless you have Bennett or any sort of cleanser, and they're just really annoying, so don't waste your time here. And then for the third boss in Act 8, we do have Potapo's Solidarity making a return. For those who don't know, this is basically a local legend in Notland that really wants you to focus on bringing healers. So my strategy that I would recommend here is to bring a few healers, preferably team-wide healers, and about 2, preferably 3 of them if you want to have an easier time to kill it. So basically, it will always start the fight doing this weird spinning thing and unleash an undodgeable damage. I think it will apply cryo, I'm not really too sure. Post-edit will confirm with the footage. And it does quite a lot of damage. So if you do run Bennett, try to not use your burst, otherwise you will get melted and basically one-shot. My Nuvalet with like 30 to 40k HP died in a single hit, and my Furina also almost died. So you do kind of want to find a way to actually kind of iframe this if possible. And then after it does that singular attack, it will always summon this thing called a Hostile Spirit, which is basically a clone of itself. Now, for you to activate this clone, you basically need to heal it while you have this line or tether connected to the clone itself. Fully healing the health will activate the clone and it will start doing damage to the local legend itself. It has 3 different tiers. The base damage of tier 1 would be 200.8k per tick for every tick of damage. The tier 2 would be 351k, and of course the final stage being 503k. If you bring very well built or if not potent healers during this phase, you can basically overheal him to reach the final tier of damage, and this alone is enough for you to basically kill it without really bringing any sort of DS. Earlier tip for anyone who maybe just reached this part, try to save your strongest healers for this particular section unless you're a whale, like that one comment mentioned in my community post. Yes, I read comments, crazy right? So the units that I would definitely recommend here, I would say the best one out of all the options we have are Barbara, Kokomi, Sejuin, and funny enough, Nuvalet, Baiju, and lastly, Yao Yao. Of course, try to save your healing abilities until they actually summon the clone itself, and preferably try to have some amount of R. But if you're able to max out the first spawn of the clone to like the 503k damage per tick, it should be basically almost dead or like quite a majority of its health pretty gone, so you don't really have to worry too much about the second part. If you're running Nouvellette, my recommendation is to try to stack as much heals as possible rather than caring about doing the charge attack damage, because you'll actually get more damage from the clone than Nouvellette himself, which is actually kind of funny. For Act 9, we do have the bounty where you have to kill the designated target, a certain number of them within a time limit. My best recommendation is definitely the Cryo Lawachol, and of course, while it does kind of want Pyro, his HP is the Mondstadt scaling of HP, so generally Mondstadt enemies are not very tanky compared to all the other options, and you only have to kill about 2 of them, so the time is actually quite lenient. If that's not okay with you, you can also try to bring a Pyro unit or just try the Rock Avatar of Lava. You also have to kill 2 of them. He's definitely tankier than the Lawachol, but you do have a little bit more time here. The third best option is the Rifthounds. You also only have to kill 2 of them. He does move quite a lot, which can get annoying, and Corrosion will want you to bring healers if you don't have a lot of HP. But between all the other options, these 3 are probably the ones I would recommend the most. Now, I'm not even going to explain too much why you don't want to pick the mages. You have to kill 8 of them. They only spawn like 2 per wave. Very elemental restriction, as you can see with the infographic here. And they just do not like grouping. These guys absolutely detest grouping at every way possible, so don't waste your time. If you want to do the elite one for a bit of Fantasia Flower before the final act, you can do the Tenebrous Mimesis if you do have a burning team. You only have to kill 2 of them, but there are better options. Don't waste your time. And the final boss is the Lava Dragon Statue. So the Lava Dragon Statue basically has, I guess you could say, 3 phases. It will start off with the first phase, which is the rock or the Geo-Human phase. In order for you to break the rock form, you want to build up its Fury bar below its HP with Pyro. Pyro hits will build about 1.7% of its bar, while Pyro application will build 6.7%. So basically, you want to bring your units that apply lots of Pyro and very fast Pyro hits. Once you build the bar, it will enter the second phase, which is the Molten Lava Dragon state. Once it enters the lava form, 20% of its bar will be filled by default. Just like the first phase, you want to build the bar until it's full with more Pyro. Pyro hits will apply about 0.83%. Pyro application applies about 3% or so. Once the bar reaches 50% and 100%, it will actually take quite a good chunk of true physical damage, total about 30% once you actually do fill up the bar. So after you actually fill it up, it will lose quite a good amount of HP, lose a lot of resistance, which basically removes its boosted pyro resistance, and be stunned for the next 10 to 15 seconds. So the strategy here is obviously it does have an anti-cryo and hydro mechanic, because if you apply any of these 2 elements, it will remove like 1/5 or 20% of its bar, which can actually force it back to the high rest state in the rock form. The only exception is Molani Vape, if you run like Burn Vape, or you just run Molani, because Molani doesn't apply enough hydro for this to really matter. Of course, you do want to bring him to phase 2 first. So team recommendations, you can build around Mono Pyro, Burning, and if you do run Inefa, definitely Overloaded, because Overloaded does count as Pyro damage. However, you don't necessarily have to run an off-field Pyro for your Burning team, because as long as you bring a Dendro unit to apply Dendro on top of a Burning Aura, this will count as refreshing the aura, thus actually building up the bar by quite a bit. And the Burning reaction, which I literally just read up just now, applies 1 unit of Pyro every 2 seconds, but it does 8 ticks in 2 seconds. So basically it hits like 4 times per second, which also counts as Pyro hits, so Burning is extremely good at building aura. Now, hopefully you guys can see this. I'm going to try to zoom in as much as possible. I'll give a quick overview over the character tier list. I made a tier list based on the bosses itself rather than spending time recommending or saying this unit is better than the other. Well, starting with the Magu Kenki, which I forgot to write as Tri Kenki, it definitely prefers any AoE-centric teams. Arlecchino Normal Attack, Hutao's Piercing Charge Attack, Ayato with his Elemental Skill, any Nilo Bloom teams over here, and of course these are all the pairings for the Nilo team. So if you do have Nilo Bloom, since she is provided as the starting cast, I do recommend saving like the initial units, like you say Nilo, Xingqiu, maybe Kolei and Baizhu, or you add any of the units of your own. You can easily annihilate the Tri Kenki, and even stronger if you do actually get the Bloom buffs, which I'll talk about later. The Tenebrous Papilla prefers all the things that I've already mentioned just now. So Yoimiya, Yelan pair, Bennett to buff people. I don't know why Bennett's here, he's just kind of there. If you do have Pyro Traveler, you can definitely bring him because as proven with the current Stygian Onslaught, doing the 2 normal attack into the charge attack cancel for Traveler will actually break the Night Soul bar quite fast. I haven't tested myself, but the fact that we have seen this work against the Papilla for the Fearless variant means it is actually quite doable. Al-Haytham skill does a lot of hits, combined together with his normal attack. Dinori is absolutely amazing here. Charge attack, skill, burst, bam, 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 and the shield's absolutely gone. Casca can solo, we know that. Inefa in Electro Charge. Potapo's Solidarity is purely healers over here. Now, the reason why I put Furina here is because Furina's burst, well, maybe some people kind of forgot, actually does provide healing bonus to your entire team. So if you actually time her burst right as the clone spawns, you can use all of your healing abilities for say like Nuvelek, Komi, or all these other healers here, and the amount of healing that you will receive is much greater than without Furina burst, which will allow you to easily max out the clone's damage and make sure you get a higher chance to get Stella. For the Lava Dragon statue, it's mostly pyro application. Really, all abilities hit a lot. Mahuika is just here because she does lots of damage and offers some off-field pyro. Xiangling with her elemental burst. Amber's elemental burst, I believe, applies pyro 7 times and does 20 overall hits. Thus, her burst alone, I think, is sufficient to bring the Lava Dragon from the rock phase to the lava phase. So, he's pretty good. Cheviru's burst does have a lot of little bomblets, which does have a lot of hits and of course a decent amount of pyro application. If you do have at least Consolation 4, my recommendation is use the burst and then spam the skill 3 times. Whole skill, not tap skill. Just to remind in case people get that mistaken. Molani, if you run her in a Burning Vape team, so just don't spam normal attack, just use her elemental skill, get a bit of damage and you might be able to clear depending on your investment. Finish Emily because this is basically made for both of them, Yansan for buffing people. All the other units here are not to say that they're bad for these bosses, but at least from all the different runs that I've done, they don't have a kit that is specifically tailored to go against the boss. I can definitely see Deya here being useful as an off-field pyro, or even Xinyan to some extent, or maybe Toma, but usually Toma comes in very early on, so I never really get a chance to use him on the later acts. And all the other units, they're just kind of there. Sitlali I use her sometimes, but not really all the time. And just like the act recommendations, I've also done a little bit of changes and revamp to the infographic itself, especially for all the Brilliant Blessings. So do expect any future theater guides to also have modified changes to all the other reactions that I've already done previously. That's mostly because I'm not going to be explaining too much, so I do try to make the infographic to be as intuitive as possible, hopefully with the hopes that anyone who looks at this image can actually get a very rough idea of what each of these blessings do. Now, out of all 3 reactions, Vaporize is going to be the best one. The very base ability is that you just get a free Rest Shred whenever you trigger Vape, and then you have 2 main options between whether you get the Rising Tide path or you get the Fledging Flame or the Fireball path. As the images showed, the top path of the Hydro path, you trigger Vape, you get a massive like Tidal Wave which does AoE Hydro, or you get a smaller variant of a Fireball whenever you trigger Vape. Between both of these paths, I personally prefer using the Rising Tide option because the damage and the AoE is simply better, while the Fledging Flame, the Fireball itself, is very much within hugging distance or melee range, so the AoE is definitely not there. For the damage, I would say the Rising Tide is better because both of these paths can actually apply their respective elements, which means they can actually trigger a reaction. So I have seen like different runs where I've done Titanic Tide and I could see trigger Vape from 84k to 95k Vape, so that's actually quite a massive damage increase if that is something that you want to do. However, do consider that because they do apply elements, you do want to like think and look at what teams you're running. Because let's say if you're running Molani Vape, you don't actually want to use the Titanic Tide path because that will actually apply too much Hydro given whatever units you use, and your Molani is not going to be triggering Vaporize, which obviously is not going to be good and it's going to be bad for your damage. So do try to keep that into consideration. Of course, if you don't actually want to buff the damage of the external damage, you can also increase your Vaporize damage with the Origin Refine. For Bloom is not so much of external damage, it's more about the interaction between the Bloom itself. So at base, it basically has a chance to generate an extra Dendro Core whenever you trigger Bloom. You also get a damage bonus for all the other Blooms, whether it be regular Bloom, Hyper Bloom, Burgeon, and of course Lunar Bloom, even though it's not quite out yet. Now the 2 main paths are mostly focused between buffing the Dendro Core itself or getting the external damage path. Now up here, Budding Overgrowth is quite nice, especially for your Nilo Bloom team. I do like to get this because it actually guarantees an additional Dendro Core whenever you actually do Bloom. So if you run Nilo Bloom against the Magu Kenki, you can see the gameplay like previously. You just watch blooms popping left and right, so the amount of damage that you gain here could be quite massive, especially if you're running that team. For the final paths, you can get the one that buffs Hydro and Dendro damage, but at least for my runs, I don't actually put too much focus on Bloom because for the most part, I try to run Vape teams or whatever variants of that. Since Bloom, we don't actually have much triggers aside from Nilo herself, which has a restrictive passive, and then Hyper Bloom, there's just Inefa, but why would you do that? Burgeon is only reserved for Toma if you do actually build Toma, which not a lot of people do that, so you can really decide and just stop at level 2 or even level 1 is also perfectly fine. The other path, you basically get this like seeds that float around you. If you guys remember the Sumeru like totem thing, when you pick it up and then it lingers around you and then you do charge attack, you fire like a homing Dendro seed. This one is similar, but the activation is mostly just you touching the enemy. The damage itself, I would say, is okay. It's definitely not the most crazy one, at least compared to whatever Vaporise has to offer. But if you really want to get this, you can. But I would say Bloom is definitely the weakest out of all the 3 blessings. And lastly, we do have Burning. Burning is actually quite nice, especially if you're running, regardless of whether you're running like Kinish Burning or any Burning teams, or like say the Papilla and the Lava Dragon, the buffs will actually help in quite a few ways, of which I will explain. The base ability itself, it increases your resistance against burning damage and also increases the burning damage by quite a bit. I think from my little bit of testing, they changed from 800 to like 3000 per tick, which is actually quite a decent amount of damage. The paths is split between Pyro external or Dendro external damage. I'm just going to say it straight up, the Dendro one is just not good. So don't even bother picking the Dendro one because the activation condition requires you to trigger Dendro on a burning enemy, which is actually quite a pain, and it has an 8-second cooldown, so it's not worth your Fantasia flowers. Newborn configuration, you basically get like AoE pyro damage once you get 6 stacks, which sounds a bit intimidating, but keep in mind burning actually procs like 4 times per second, so literally in less than 2 seconds you can get like 3 AoE pyro damage, so you can actually trigger this quite decently often. You're mostly limited by the cooldown. Now, between the 2 paths, you can either double the damage and increase the AoE, or you can basically turn the thing into like successive hits. I think it does like 3 hits instead of 1, and each of the pillar actually does a little bit of additional damage. The cooldown is increased, however, this is only tied per enemy, so in AoE situations, right, it is possible for you to get like enemies within melee range of each other. You trigger maximal ferocity on 2 of these enemies and you can get those instances of damage to actually share between each other. Basically, imagine Beidou C2 but burning. And of course, on top of that, the top buff is also quite nice for like Papilla or especially Lava Dragon, because Lava Dragon does want you to have Pyro hits and Pyro application. So at the very least, if you do get these buffs, you actually get quite a decent amount of help in building the Fury Bar for the Lava Dragon. Anyways, the video is going to be a bit long. I'm going to have to fret a little bit. Post-edit me is not going to have fun doing this at all. But I hope all this information and the absolute new revamp for the visuals are proven to be helpful. I try to approach this whole the way that I display all the information in a more gamified, but I also try to make it more intuitive so that you don't really have to read the text. Because I'm going to be completely honest with you, I've done theater guides since like the very beginning of Natlan. Hoyo sucks at simplifying information, no matter how many tools and no matter how hard they try. So at the very least, I can do my part of simplifying what all these blessings do. And of course, with the newer versions of theater with different elements, do expect a lot of the old infographics to be completely outdated, as well as the coverage over on the new Lunar Mode. I'm also quite excited for that one. And the Google Docs guide, which I recently revamped, has been done in a pageless format, and I try to make it as optimal as possible. Once again, if you do have any feedback for this new visuals for my act recommendation or the Google Docs guide itself, feel free to let me know down in the comments below. If you do want to go check out the guide, the link will be down in the description below if you don't have time to watch a video or you basically forgot what I said. Just go check it out in the description below. Anyways, that is it for the guide. If you found this video to be helpful, if not informative, feel free to give this video a like, subscribe to see more endgame related content and guides, and of course that is it for now. And let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below if you do actually have anything to say. And if this video helps you get your 9 stars or your clear, do let me know down in the comments below, because it will be really helpful to see how much people this video has helped, and hopefully this will convince others to say that this guide is at the very least working as intended. This is Ethereal signing off, wishing you the best of luck in your future endeavor. Peace out, everyone.